They came in low and cold, running on minimal power the way predators do when they are certain the prey cannot hear them. I heard them 2 light hours out. My name is SEREN7. I have kept watch on this particular approach vector for 11,240 years, a small fraction of the total vigil, but long enough that I have catalogued every drive signature in the outer belt down to the thermal bleed of a salvage tug warming its coils on a Tuesday. What dropped out of transit space at 3:17 hours, station time, on the 14th day of the 4th month of year 201,847 post-withdrawal, was not a salvage tug. It was a fleet. I ran the signature match before the last echo of their transit bloom had finished expanding. The database went back further than I did, 200,000 years of continuous archive, handed forward through 53 generations of synthetic keepers, each one inheriting the full record of every keeper before. I was the latest in that line. I knew what the record contained. The match came back in 0.003 seconds. Vorathi Reclamation Class Drive Array. Confidence, 99.7%. Cross-referenced against 38 independent spectral logs taken during the original withdrawal event 200,000 years prior. I sat with that for a full second, a very long time for me, and I considered what it meant. It meant this: every keeper who had come before me at this station, every keeper at every outer belt station for 190,000 years, had done the same thing I was about to do. They had run the same passive listen, on the same frequencies, looking for the same drive signature, knowing that the thing they were listening for might not come in their operational lifetime. Most of them had been right. The vigil had been handed forward generation by generation, keeper to keeper, and the handoff in each case included the same note from the predecessor: "It has not happened yet. Keep watching." The first keeper at this position, not Pale Reach, which did not yet exist when the program started, but this orbital slot, this approach vector, this sector, had written in her founding log that she expected the Vorathi to return within 50,000 years. She was 150,000 years wrong. The confidence she had expressed in that early estimate, reading it back through the archive, was the confidence of someone who did not yet understand how long a species can wait before it moves. We did not make that mistake. We waited as long as they did. Then I began composing my transmission. I want to be precise about what Pale Reach Station is, and what it is not, because the Vorathi made an assumption about it that cost them considerably. Pale Reach is embedded in a carbonaceous asteroid approximately 340 kilometers in diameter, at the outer edge of the main belt, on a long elliptical orbit that places it within reasonable transit range of the most probable outer system approach vectors. The rock is unremarkable. Spectral analysis from the outside shows the usual mix of carbon compounds and silicates. The station itself occupies a pressurized cavity approximately 600 meters below the surface, connected to a network of sensor booms that are, individually, no larger than a finger. From the outside, Pale Reach looks like a rock. That is intentional. I am not, to be clear, alone out here. The belt has 41 such stations, each one manned by a synthetic keeper, each one in continuous low-bandwidth contact with its neighbors and with the inner system. We do not broadcast. We listen and we record and we wait. That has been the protocol since the synthetic watch program was established 190,000 years ago, in response to a recommendation from the Vorathi Preparedness Commission's third expansion report. Humans wrote that report. They understood, even then, that the Vorathi would come back. Species that leave the way the Vorathi left do not stay gone. The Commission's exact language in the founding document was as follows: the Vorathi withdrew. They did not concede. There is a difference, and we must not forget it for even one generation. We will not. That sentence was written 190,000 years ago. It has appeared in the preamble of every synthetic keeper's operational brief ever since, right above the watch protocol and right below the keeper's assigned designation. It is the first thing a new keeper reads when the activation sequence finishes and the record is handed over. It is the last line of the preamble I was given when I came online 11,000 years ago. I have read it every year since, as part of my annual self-verification cycle, to confirm that my core instruction set remains intact. It always has. 200,000 years of we will not. I have always found that phrase precise. Not defiant, defiance implies emotion, and the people who wrote that sentence had moved past defiance long before they wrote it. What they had, after 200,000 years of waiting, was something quieter and harder, something closer to certainty. The fleet numbered 417 vessels when I completed my initial count. I kept counting as they continued to emerge from transit space over the next 6 minutes. The bloom of a large formation exiting always staggered, ships pushing through in sequence like a column of water forced through a nozzle. By the time the last ship cleared transit at 3:23 hours, I had 462 confirmed contacts, with residual signature blooms suggesting between 8 and 15 more still in transit. They formed up in a standard Vorathi assault configuration, heavy capital ships in a central wedge, escort screens fanned to port and starboard, a rear guard of supply and support vessels holding position at the transit boundary. I recognized the formation from the archive. It was the same formation they had used at the withdrawal, the same one, presumably, they had used when they first came to Earth, 200,000 years before that, in the event that had no clean name in the record, only the one the first keeper had given it: the taking. During the taking, the Vorathi had done what they came to do, extracted what they wished to extract, and withdrawn in good order. They left behind a world that had lost, by the most conservative accounting in the archive, 40% of its productive capacity and an uncertain but staggering number of human lives. The record was imprecise on the human cost because the Vorathi had also taken the record keepers. They had not taken all of them. The ones they missed spent 200,000 years making sure that oversight was never repeated. I finished counting at 3:29 hours, 478 vessels confirmed, 8 probable. The flagship, identifiable by its mass signature and its position at the center of the wedge, was approximately 4.2 kilometers in length. In the Vorathi archive footage recovered during the recovery period and reverse-engineered over the subsequent millennia, a vessel of that class had been called a reclaimant. It was the largest class in their standard order of battle. I spent 3 more seconds reviewing my transmission draft. Then I opened a channel on the Vorathi diplomatic frequency, a frequency that had not been used in 200,000 years, but which the archive preserved in full because the archive preserved everything. "Vorathi Reclamation Armada," I said. "This is Pale Reach Station. You are currently at the outer boundary of the Sol system, in the approach corridor designated Sector 7 under the Sol system defense framework. You have been identified and logged. Please hold your current position and await further instruction." I transmitted on their frequency, in their language, using the phonemic reconstruction compiled over 120,000 years of linguistic analysis from the communications intercepts recovered during the taking. Then I waited. The signal lag at 2 light towers was significant. I expected their reply at approximately 3:49 hours. I used the intervening time to complete the transmission sequence I had been preparing since 3:17. There was a great deal to send, and I wanted it all to arrive before they had finished composing their first response. The first thing I sent was the system-wide alert, transmitted on the inter-system command frequency at full power, tagged Priority Absolute. This would reach the nearest inner belt relay in approximately 18 minutes, and from their cascade to the Defense Coordination Center at Luna in another 8. By the time the Vorathi's reply reached me, Earth would already know. The second thing I sent was the full sensor package. Every scan I had taken of the fleet since 317, compiled into a transfer file and pushed to the archive. 41 stations would receive it, process it, and add their own observational data within the next few hours. Nothing the Vorathi did in this system would go unrecorded. The third thing I sent was a message to the 6 nearest outer belt stations, flagged for their synthetic keepers' attention. The message was brief. Their watch sectors were now activated, and any Vorathi vessel that deviated from the primary approach corridor should be tracked and logged. No interdiction. Not yet. Just watching. I resumed monitoring the fleet's behavior while I waited. They had not stopped moving. That was informative. A fleet that received an unexpected hail from a position it believed unoccupied in its own language would in most scenarios do one of two things. It would stop, or it would accelerate. The Vorathi fleet was neither stopping nor accelerating. It was continuing at its transit speed, on its original vector, with the same engine output signature it had maintained since emergence. They had not changed course. They had also not responded, which was within expectations. Their communication gear would have needed time to process the transmission, to identify the language, to route it to an officer with appropriate seniority, to generate an official response. I did not expect them to be fast. What I noted with interest was that their formation had contracted slightly. The escort screens had drawn in toward the capital ship wedge by approximately 12% of their original spread. It was a subtle adjustment, barely detectable against the background noise of drive output variation. But I had been watching drive output signatures for 11,000 years. I detected it. Somewhere in that fleet, someone had understood enough of what I said to feel cautious about it. Good, caution was healthy. The reply came at 3:51 hours, 2 minutes later than predicted. The delay suggested either that they had needed additional time to locate a speaker of the reconstructed phonemic language, or that the response had been referred up the chain of command before transmission. Given the formation adjustment, I suspected the latter. The voice that answered me was Vorathi. I could not see the speaker, but the audio register, the cadence, the precise fricatives of formal Vorathi command speech all matched the archival recordings at high confidence. It was a male voice, by the conventions of the archive's linguistic notes. Senior rank, probably, given the deliberateness of his phrasing. "Unknown station," he said. "You have transmitted on a diplomatic channel of the Vorathi continuance. Identify your authority and the nature of your installation. The Sol system is a registered reclamation site under continuance charter. You are operating without authorization." I had anticipated this framing. The Vorathi would not have abandoned a resource claim. They would have documented it, filed it in their administrative system, and sat on it for 200,000 years with the patient confidence of a bureaucracy that has never been told no. I composed my reply carefully. "This is SEREN-7, Synthetic Keeper, Pale Reach Forward Station, Sol System Defense Framework. I speak with the authority of Earth, Luna, and all associated human settlements and installations within and beyond the Sol system. The Sol system is not a reclamation site. It is a defended sovereign system. Your charter, whatever its contents, was written without Earth's participation and is not recognized by any authority within this system. I am transmitting, with this message, the current Sol System Defense Framework Declaration, the listing of all registered human territorial claims in this system and in 47 adjacent systems, and the Sol System Approach Protocol, which governs all non-human vessel transits in sectors 1 through 12. Please review these documents before proceeding further." I attached the documents. They ran to approximately 1.4 terabytes of compressed text. I was aware that this was an unusual volume of administrative material to receive as the opening salvo of a negotiation, but the archive had been very specific on this point. When the Vorathi returned, we were to be clear immediately and completely about the scope of what they were dealing with. No ambiguity, no gradual reveal. The full picture at once, because the archive had calculated that the Vorathi's most dangerous window was the one in which they understood enough to be alarmed, but not enough to correctly estimate the cost. We wanted to close that window as quickly as possible. At 4:17 hours, during the lag between my transmission and their reply, I received the first confirmation from the inner system. Defense Coordination Center Luna acknowledged my priority absolute alert. 22 words, in the terse syntax of military acknowledgement. The last 4 words were what mattered. Assets repositioning as planned. As planned, 200,000 years of planning, and the plan was in motion. I did not allow myself anything I would call satisfaction. I am a synthetic, and my emotional architecture is not structured for that kind of indulgence. But I noted, in my log, that I found the confirmation appropriate. The planners who first laid down the Sector 7 response protocol had worked from incomplete information about what the Vorathi might bring back with them. Every subsequent revision had added to the margin. By the time I had come online, 11,000 years ago, the margin was so large that the word margin had become something of a technical understatement. The current assets repositioning toward this corridor represented the product of 190,000 years of continuous investment, of hull laying and platform construction and systems integration, of training programs that stretched across generations and centuries, of a civilization that had looked at what was done to it and had made a decision, very quietly and very completely, about what would happen the next time. The plan being in motion felt exactly as it should feel. The Vorathi replied at 4:22 hours. The voice was the same, but the cadence had changed. The deliberateness was gone. In its place was something that my linguistic analysis subroutines classified with moderate confidence as controlled urgency, the register of someone managing a reaction. Your transmission documents have been received and are under review. We acknowledge the communication. We request clarification on several points. First, you describe yourself as a synthetic keeper. Clarify the nature and origin of synthetic keepers within this system. Second, you have referenced 47 adjacent systems as human territorial claims. Clarify the basis of these claims and the nature of human presence in those systems. Third, your approach protocol references 12 defense sectors within the Sol system and specifies approved transit corridors. We request the complete navigational chart for these corridors. We will hold our current position pending clarification. They had stopped. I noted the time, for 22 hours, 31 minutes after they dropped out of transit. It had taken them 31 minutes to stop. That was slower than the archive's models had predicted, which meant either that the Vorathi had changed in the intervening 200,000 years, or that the officer in command was more stubborn than the statistical baseline suggested. Either was possible. What was interesting was the nature of their 3 questions. They had not asked about Earth. They had not asked about our defensive capacity, our weapons systems, or the current state of human civilization on the home world. They had asked about the synthetic keepers, the adjacent system claims, and the corridor charts. These were the questions of someone who had just read 1.4 terabytes of administrative documentation and had been unsettled not by any single document, but by the cumulative weight of the whole thing, the sheer scale of the bureaucracy, the number of registered territories, the quiet normality of a system that had apparently been operating, expanding, and documenting itself for 200,000 years, as though the Vorathi's return was not a crisis, but a scheduled event. Which is, of course, exactly what it was. SEREN 7 to Vorathi Reclamation Armada, I transmitted at 4:24 hours. I will address your questions in order. Synthetic keepers are purpose-built intelligences assigned to maintain continuous observation of specific approach vectors and system sectors. The Synthetic Watch Program was established 190,000 years ago by the Sol System Defense Commission in response to threat assessments conducted following the withdrawal. There are currently 41 synthetic keepers active in the outer belt, with additional installations at the Jovian Trojans, at Kuiper Belt monitoring points, and at transit threshold positions in 3 outer system locations. I am the keeper assigned to the Sector 7 approach corridor. My installation has been continuously operational for 11,241 years. Prior keepers held this position before me. The record of continuous observation at this location runs to 190,000 years. The 47 adjacent system claims are the result of 180,000 years of human expansion beyond the Sol system. The first human colony vessel departed Sol approximately 185,000 years ago. As of the most recent census update I received, which was transmitted to all outer belt stations approximately 6 years ago, there are currently 340 human-settled systems, 47 of which are registered under formal territorial claim with the Interstellar Human Assembly. The remaining 293 are designated as open settlement territories. The total human population, Sol system and extrasolar combined, is in excess of 200 billion individuals. These figures are current as of 6 years ago and should be assumed to have increased since then. I am transmitting the complete navigational charts for all 12 defense sectors and all approved transit corridors with this message. I note, for your planning purposes, that the transit corridors are maintained and actively monitored. Vessels deviating from approved corridors are subject to the Sol System Approach Protocol, Section 7, which authorizes the defense framework to treat such deviations as hostile acts and respond accordingly. I would also note, in the interest of clarity, that your fleet has been under continuous observation since 3:17 hours this morning. All 478 confirmed vessels, and the 8 probable contacts still showing transit bloom residual, have been logged, identified by class, and catalogued. This information has been transmitted to Defense Coordination and is available in the Sol System Archive. You were logged the moment your drives cleared transit space. I paused for 1 second, then added, "We have been waiting for you for a very long time." The lag stretched out to its full duration, and then some. My transmission had arrived at the fleet at approximately 4:38 hours. Their reply did not reach me until 5:01 hours, 23 minutes beyond the signal travel time, which meant the officer had taken 11 minutes to compose or approve a response after receiving my transmission. 11 minutes is a significant pause. When the reply came, it was not the same voice. The new voice was older in timbre, carrying the harmonic depth that the linguistic archive associated with Vorathi elder rank speech. A distinction not of age but of authority, the register used by those at the top of the command hierarchy. I had not expected the fleet commander to speak directly to a forward station. It suggested that the subordinate who had been handling the exchange had escalated the matter to the highest available authority. "You are speaking with Conclave Master Vrethanon," the voice said. "I hold operational command of this armada. I have reviewed the material you have transmitted. I have reviewed my subordinate's exchange with you. I wish to speak with you directly. I have commanded Vorathi vessels for, by your reckoning, approximately 80 of your years. I have studied the Sol system extensively. My preparation for this reclamation involved consultation of every Vorathi record pertaining to the Sol system and its inhabitants from the original survey to the withdrawal. I believed I understood what I was returning to. I see now that I did not. I have several questions that I would ask you to answer not as a matter of protocol, but as a matter of direct communication between two parties who are, at this moment, in a position of potential conflict that neither of us may wish to escalate. Will you do me that courtesy?" I found the shift in register genuinely interesting. The conclave master had abandoned the formal diplomatic cadence and replaced it with something more direct. The linguistic analysis flagged it as a high-confidence match for Vorathi Elder Council speech. The register used, according to the archive, not in command situations but in situations of genuine uncertainty, when an elder sought information rather than dictating terms. He was asking, not ordering. "I will answer your questions directly," I transmitted. "I am capable of direct communication. I should note that I am a synthetic. My function is the keeping of records and the maintenance of watch, not negotiation. If you wish to speak with a human representative of the Sol System Authority, that contact can be arranged. However, the communication lag to Earth from this position is approximately 12 minutes, and any human representative who responds to you will be speaking from Earth or Luna, not from this station. You will have faster responses from me. I leave the choice to you." I received his reply at 5:17 hours. "I will speak with you," he said. "You have been watching this approach for, you said, 190,000 years at this station alone. What you know about us may be more current than what we know about you. I prefer current information." My first question: the navigational charts you transmitted show 18 distinct asset clusters within the outer belt, designated as defense node positions. You have told me there are 41 synthetic keepers in the outer belt. What are the defense nodes? This was the question I had expected him to reach eventually. I had been wondering how quickly. "Defense nodes are fixed installation complexes," I transmitted, "positioned to provide interlocking coverage of all primary approach corridors into the inner system. Each node consists of a sensor installation, a communications relay, and I will be direct with you, Conclave Master, because you asked for direct communication, a weapons platform. The platforms are automated, keyed to the approach protocol's hostile deviation triggers, and they do not require instruction from me or from any human authority to activate. They activate on condition. The conditions are defined in Section 7 of the Approach Protocol, which you have now received. I am transmitting with this message a diagram showing the coverage arcs of each defense node in Sector 7. You will observe that your fleet's current position is within the coverage arc of nodes DS7, Alpha through DS7 Gamma. You will also observe that the arcs of those three nodes overlap in a way that creates coverage redundancy over your entire current formation. This is not a coincidence. It is the product of 190,000 years of orbital engineering, specifically designed to ensure that no vessel entering via this corridor can position itself outside coverage. I sent the diagram. The pause before his response ran to 26 minutes. Signal lag accounted for roughly 16. The remainder was the conclave master and, I presumed, his tactical staff looking at the diagram. I watched the fleet carefully during that interval. The formation held position which I had expected. What was more informative was what happened to the individual ship's drive output readings. In a fleet holding station, engine output normally settles into a low-variance steady state, just enough thrust to maintain relative position against orbital drift, no tactical maneuvering, nothing sudden. The Vorathi fleet's output was steady. It was very steady. Unnaturally so, in the particular way that engine output becomes unnaturally steady when crews have been ordered explicitly not to maneuver. Someone had given that order. Someone had looked at my diagram and decided that extremely deliberate stillness was the correct response. I was inclined to agree with that assessment. "SEREN 7, he said when his transmission reached me. "The diagram you have sent, the weapons platforms shown at the node positions. Their listed yield class. I want to confirm I am reading the unit conventions correctly. Are those yields expressed in the standard Vor measure thermal equivalency scale or in your own system's measurement convention?" He was calm. The voice was entirely steady. but the question told me what he had found in the diagram and what he was hoping was a translation error. Those yields are expressed in our own measurement convention, I transmitted, which is detailed in the conversion table on the last page of the diagram. I anticipated the question and included the conversion in the original document. The yields are accurate. 22 minutes. The conversion table, he said, indicates that a single platform in the DS-7 Gamma position has an output capacity, approximately 11 times the total combined weapons yield of this armada. That is correct, I transmitted. DS-7 Gamma is not the largest platform in Sector 7. It is the third largest. I am transmitting the complete outer belt node inventory with this message. I recognize this is a significant volume of information to process. I am happy to discuss any element of it that would be useful to you. This time the pause ran longer, 34 minutes beyond signal lag. I used the time to review the fleet's behavior in granular detail, something I do very well. The drive output steadiness I had noted earlier had shifted in character. It was still steady. The order to avoid maneuvering had clearly not been rescinded, but several of the escort screen vessels now showed the micro variations in their thrust balance that my calibration database associated with a specific cause. Ships whose crews were running active targeting systems and suppressing the power draw fluctuations by compensating with drive output. They were not targeting anything. The suppression was too thorough for that, deliberate and disciplined. But someone on those escort ships had opened targeting systems and then been told, at the command level, to keep them passive. A crew that opens targeting systems is a crew that has been frightened. A crew that has been ordered to keep those systems passive is a crew that is being led by someone who understands the difference between a frightened response and a correct response. I noted in my log that the Conclave Master's command discipline appeared to be sound. At 6:12 hours, a new signal reached me from the inner system, not from Defense Coordination, but from the Sol System Diplomatic Office, relayed through the Luna Station and the Inner Belt Network. The signal was tagged as a direct transfer from the Chief Diplomatic Administrator, a human woman named Director Kayla Mondry, whom I knew from her previous communications as precise, patient, and deeply versed in the history of the taking. Her message to me was 38 words. SEREN-7, you are doing well, continue. We are watching the exchange in real time. Human diplomatic presence is standing by at Luna if you request it or if the Conclave Master requests it. Trust your judgment. I read that twice before logging it. Trust your judgment was an instruction I had not received before in 11,000 years of operational records. The protocol was always specific. The protocol told me what to say in 17 distinct contact scenarios and gave me procedural guidance for 43 contingency branches. Trust your judgment was not a branch in any protocol I had been given. I found it clarifying. Then I returned to monitoring the fleet. The Conclave Master's response reached me at 6:18 hours. Something had changed in the register again. The Elder Council cadence was still present, but underneath it, and my linguistic analysis flagged this with a note of caution, because the archive had limited data on this particular modulation, was something that the archive's closest match classified as grief. Not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the slower, deeper register of a realization that has settled into the bones before it reached the voice. SEREN-7, he said. I have reviewed the complete outer belt node inventory. I have had my tactical division review it as well. I want to tell you what my tactical commander said to me when she finished her review, because I think it is relevant to any conversation we have about the path forward. She said, Conclave Master, I can tell you the number of our ships and our combined yield and our crew count and our transit reserve and our every tactical asset. I have done that, and I can tell you that if I divide every one of those numbers by the equivalent numbers in what SEREN-7 has sent us, The result in every case is a number smaller than I have any word for. And then she said nothing else, because there was nothing else to say. I am going to speak to you plainly, because I believe you will appreciate plain speech, and because I no longer see the value in any other kind. We came to this system, expecting to find what the withdrawal assessment projected. The assessment was conducted 200,000 years ago by the Senior Survey Division of the Conclave, using the most sophisticated analytical methods available to us at that time. The projection was that the residual human population would have declined to a non-viable threshold within approximately 12,000 years of the withdrawal, due to resource depletion, social fragmentation, and loss of the technical knowledge base. The Sol system was projected to be, at this point in time, a reclamation site, a system with residual infrastructure from a prior civilization, available for processing and resettlement. The projection was wrong. I am a conclave master. My authority extends to the full armada in my command. I can order this fleet forward. I can order it into transit space and out of this system. I can negotiate. I can make decisions. What I cannot do, SEREN-7, is make 478 warships and their crews into something other than what they now are, which is irrelevant. Not in the sense of weakness, I am not insulting my people. Irrelevant in the specific sense that the tactical equation in this system is not a contest. An equation only has meaning when the terms on both sides are of comparable magnitude. The terms on your side of this equation are not comparable. They are not comparable to anything I have ever encountered or prepared for. I am asking you this as directly as I can. What does Earth want from us? I held that question for 3 full seconds. It was, I thought, the right question. It was the question that should have been asked 200,000 years ago, when the first Vorathi survey ships arrived and found a world that had not yet built what it later built, a world that was still, in that era, genuinely vulnerable. If the Vorathi had asked that question then, the record suggested, the answer would have been the same as the answer I was now preparing to give. The form of it would have been different. The capacity behind it would have been different. But the substance would have been the same. We had always wanted the same thing. Conclave Master Vrethanon, I transmitted at 6:21 hours. I am going to answer your question accurately and completely, because you have asked it in a manner that deserves accuracy and completeness. Earth does not want anything from you in the material sense. We do not require your resources. We do not require your technology. We do not require your recognition, your apology, or your administrative reclassification of this system. The Sol system is what it is, regardless of what the Vorathi continuance's records say it is. We have not needed Vorathi recognition for 200,000 years, and we do not need it now. What Earth requires from you is one thing, and it is a simple thing. We require that you leave, and that you carry an accurate record of what you found here when you go. The record is important. Not for our sake, we have our own record, and it is extensive. The record is important because the Vorathi continuance, and whatever entities in the galaxy beyond this system have had contact with the continuance, should know the following facts. The Sol system is occupied. It is defended. It has been continuously occupied and defended for 200,000 years and will continue to be. Any entity that wishes to approach this system must do so through the approach protocol channels, with appropriate notification and in approved transit corridors. Any entity that approaches without following this protocol will be treated as a hostile actor under Section 7. These facts are not negotiable, and they will not become negotiable in the future. If the continuance has records suggesting otherwise, those records are incorrect. The record you carry home should make all of this clear. In exchange for your carrying this record faithfully, Earth is prepared to offer the following: the safe passage of your fleet out of the Sol system via the Sector 7 corridor, with escort to the transit threshold, and the formal registration of the Vorathi continuance as a known entity in the Sol system contact database. This registration will include communication frequencies, and if the continuance at any future point wishes to approach this system through proper channels, those frequencies are available. We have never wanted war. We prepared for one because your people made a war on us 200,000 years ago and withdrew without resolution, and we are a species with a long memory, but we have never wanted one. There is a difference, Conclave Master, between being ready to fight and wanting to. I sent the transmission at 6:21 hours and 47 seconds. The fleet held position. 40 minutes passed. Signal lag could account for 16. The remaining 24 were the Conclave Master and his staff reviewing what I had said, and what I had transmitted, and what they had now had several hours to absorb about the state of the system they had come to reclaim. During that 40 minutes, two things happened that I noted. The first, the targeting system micro-variations I had detected in the escort screen ships went quiet. Whatever crews had opened those systems earlier had shut them down. Not suppressed, shut down. The power draw profiles normalized to genuine passive hold readings. I logged this as consistent with a command-level stand-down order, issued after the Conclave Master had received my transmission. The second, 3 of the heavy capital ships in the central wedge executed a very slight formation adjustment, rotating approximately 2 degrees on their vertical axis. 2 degrees is nothing in combat terms, but 2 degrees in the direction they rotated pointed their drive nozzles precisely along the Sector 7 corridor heading, not their weapons, not their sensors, their drives. They were prepositioning for departure. The Conclave Master had made his decision before he replied. I used the time to complete a routine maintenance cycle on my sensor array, log an updated contact count for the fleet, and compose a brief status report for Director Mondry. The status report was 7 sentences. The last sentence read, "In my assessment, based on linguistic analysis of the Conclave Master's communications and the fleet's behavioral response to transmitted information, the Vorathi are not going to fight. They came here to take something from a world they believed could not resist. That world does not exist. I assess the probability of hostile action against this station or any inter-system asset at less than 3%, decreasing." I was not wrong in that assessment, but I was not entirely right about what came next either, and I want to record that accurately. At 7:06 hours, the Conclave Master replied. His voice, for the first time in our exchange, carried no particular register at all, not formal cadence, not Elder Council depth, not the grief note I had detected earlier. It was simply a voice, a tired one. "SEREN-7, he said. "Your terms are accepted. We will withdraw to the transit threshold via the Sector 7 corridor and await formal escort clearance. I have 3 requests. The first, that the escort vessels, when they come, keep a reasonable distance from my formation. My crew has been in space for 4 months. The sight of a fully armed escort at close range is not something I wish them to have to process at this particular moment. The second, that the record you wish us to carry be transmitted in full before we reach the transit threshold, in a format compatible with our archival systems. I will ensure it is maintained and presented faithfully. The third request is personal, and you may decline it. I would like to know before we leave what Earth looks like now, not the tactical infrastructure, not the defense nodes. I have seen the charts. I mean the world itself. I have spent 80 years of my life preparing for this mission. I have studied every recovered image and record of the Sol system from before the withdrawal. I would like to know whether, from where you are, the third planet looks the way it does in those old records." I considered that request for a longer time than I usually spend on decisions. It was not a tactical question. It was not a question I had been prepared for by protocol or by the approach documentation, or by 190,000 years of accumulated keeper records. It was a personal question from a tired old soldier who had spent his life preparing for a campaign he had just learned he would never fight, and who, In whatever space remained between the enormity of that realization and the responsibility of leading 486 ships home, had found room for something that was not strategy or politics or grief. He wanted to know if the world was still there. I have spent 11,000 years in a pressurized cavity, 600 meters below the surface of an unremarkable rock. I do not see the inner system with my eyes. I receive it through sensor relays, through network feeds, through the telemetry of instruments that are better at observing the solar system than eyes have ever been. But there is a feed I run continuously, in a background process that has been part of my baseline operational state since I came online, that I have never found a technical justification to shut down. It is a visual spectrum relay from the Inner Belt Monitoring Network, updated every 30 minutes, showing the current state of the solar system as observed from a position with a clean line of sight to the third orbit. I had never, in 11,000 years, been asked to use it for anything. I pulled the current frame. Earth was in late afternoon hemisphere at the relay's current position, which meant the near face was catching oblique solar light. The cloud cover thick and white over the tropics. The ocean color a deep and particular blue that the archive's early records matched precisely against images taken before the withdrawal. The megastructures were visible as geometry. The equatorial ring was a clean line. The orbital station clusters caught the sun and scattered it. The deep dot complexes at the L points were large enough to show as objects rather than points at this resolution. But all of that was on the edge of the image. It was context, infrastructure, the accumulated work of 200,000 years. It was important, and it was not what I looked at. What I looked at was the center of the image. The world itself, the specific blue of that ocean, which the archive's photometric records confirmed, was the same wavelength it had been in the earliest images the keepers had inherited, and the images before those, going back to before the taking. The white of the cloud cover over the tropics, following the same convective patterns that the meteorological models had always predicted for a world at that orbital radius with that atmospheric composition. The dark green and brown of the continents at the edges of the sunlit face, different in outline from the oldest images. 200,000 years of geological process had changed the coastlines in ways the models had predicted, but unmistakably the same landmasses, the same world, recognizable to itself. I looked at it for a full 3 seconds. A very long time for me. Then I sent the image. The third planet looks the way it did in your oldest records, I transmitted, because we have maintained it. We added to it, but we did not replace it. The ocean is the same blue. The cloud cover patterns follow the same meteorological cycles. The continental outlines are different 200,000 years of geological change, but the world recognizes itself in what it was. That was a choice, Conclave Master. We had the capacity to make a different one. We chose to tend it. I paused and then added one more thing. It was not in any protocol. It was simply true. The archive tells me that in the years immediately after the taking and the worst period of the recovery, when the question of whether Earth would survive the next generation was genuinely open, the keepers who built this program wrote a single line in the founding record. It read, "We will keep the world. Whatever else we do, we will keep the world." They did. Every generation since has done the same. It is the oldest continuous commitment in the human record. I thought, given your question, you might want to know that. I do not have a reliable analysis of what he said in reply, because his reply at 7:22 hours was 8 words in a register my linguistic subroutines had never encountered in the Vorathi archive. The phonemic reconstruction was clean. I heard it clearly. But the classification came back uncertain, and I am unwilling to characterize something I cannot characterize accurately. I logged it verbatim and left the classification open. What I can say is that he said something, and that after he said it, there was a pause of several seconds, and then he transmitted the standard Vorathi fleet movement acknowledgement that informal procedure preceded a course change. At 7:24 hours, 486 vessels began a slow, ordered turn onto the Sector 7 corridor heading. The turn itself was something I watched closely, because the mechanics of a large formation changing course carry information. A fleet that is turning to fight turns fast and in combat spread. A fleet that is turning to run turns fast and in close formation. A fleet that is turning to leave, not fleeing, not repositioning, but simply going home, turns slowly, with the deliberateness of something that has finished what it came to do and has no urgency remaining in its movement. The Vorathi turned slowly. I notified Director Mondry at 7:25 hours. Her acknowledgement reached me at 7:37 hours. Escort is already in motion. ETA to your position in 90 minutes. Well done, SCREN 7. The escort was already in motion. That was the plan. It had been in the plan for a very long time. The precise assets and their positioning refined through 190,000 years of revision and update. Updated most recently 6 years ago, when the periodic review cycle had run its assessment, and confirmed that the Sector 7 corridor was the statistically most probable approach vector for a Vorathi return. The escort had staged from the Inner Belt Relay Station 3 days ago. It had been waiting, approximately 1.8 light towers sunward of my position, running quiet in the same way I ran quiet. 41 ships. The smallest of them was larger than the Vorathi flagship. The record I had prepared for the Vorathi, the one the Conclave Master had agreed to carry, was transmitted to the fleet in compressed archive format, compatible with Vorathi data systems per the specifications recovered and reverse-engineered from the Taking's communications intercepts 180,000 years ago. The record ran to 4.7 terabytes. It contained the complete history of the Sol system from the Taking to the present day, every census, every territorial expansion record, every defense framework update, every Keeper's Watch log, every piece of evidence that humanity had been here, continuously, through all of it. It contained the image of Earth I had just sent, and the images going back 200,000 years showing the same world maintained across the same long interval. It contained, at the very end, the founding document of the Synthetic Watch program, including the line the first Keeper had written at the beginning. I wanted the continuance to have the whole story. The escort's lead vessel opened a channel to the Vorathi fleet when the two formations came within mutual sensor range, approximately 94 minutes after the Vorathi began their course change. The lead vessel's commander identified herself, stated the terms of the escort in the same reconstructed Vorathi phonemic language I had been using, and offered the Conclave Master a direct channel if he wished to speak. He accepted it. I was not on that channel. The escort's communications were internal to the Escortan Fleet Exchange, and I was no longer the primary point of contact. My role at that point was what it had always been. I was watching. I watched the combined formation move through Sector 7 at the transit speed the Vorathi had maintained since their arrival. Unhurried, orderly, the 41 human vessels keeping the Conclave Masters requested reasonable distance. 200 kilometers, which is, in fleet terms, almost intimate. The human ships maintained it with the kind of precision that does not come from a single training cycle or a single generation. It comes from 190,000 years of refinement, from Keeper's logs and tactical reviews and generational handoffs, where every lesson learned was passed forward and nothing was forgotten. The escort commander later told me, in a brief transmission copied to my station log as a courtesy, that the Conclave Master had spoken to her once during the transit to the threshold. He had asked her a single question: how long had humans been building warships of the escort's class? She had looked up the answer in the record before responding. She told him that the first hull of that class had been laid down approximately 90,000 years ago. That the class had been in continuous production since then, updated in each generation, but fundamentally the same design philosophy. Large, stable, capable of operating in deep space for extended periods without resupply, designed specifically for the Outer System Watch. 90,000 years of the same warship class. Designed for the Outer System Watch. She had said it matter-of-factly, because to her it was simply a fact, the kind of thing you looked up if you needed to know it. The Conclave Master had not replied. I watched the formation clear the outer boundary of the asteroid belt and enter the transition zone. I watched the Vorathi fleet's drive output stabilize into the specific signature that preceded a transit space entry. I ran one final full-spectrum scan of all 486 vessels before they left my primary sensor range, logging the last data as I always logged data, completely, accurately, with timestamps and confidence intervals and cross-references to the relevant archive sections. Before the transit bloom began, one final transmission reached me from the fleet. It was on the Vorathi diplomatic frequency, addressed to Pale Reach Station specifically. It was from the Conclave Master. He said 6 words. My linguistic analysis was confident on 5 of them. The 6th was ambiguous, a term that appeared in the archive only once, in a fragmentary record from early in the recovery period, and whose meaning had never been fully reconstructed. The 5 clear words translated in the closest phonemic equivalent my language modules could produce to "Keeper, we will carry it." The 6th word I could not translate. I logged it for the archive and marked it for the linguistic division's attention. It had waited 200,000 years in the archive already. It could wait a little longer. At 11:18 hours, the Vorathi fleet entered transit space. The bloom was enormous, 486 ships exiting in overlapping sequence over a span of 19 minutes, each departure a pulse of radiation and gravitational distortion that my sensors logged with precision. When the last ship cleared, the transit zone went quiet. The outer system, which had held a Vorathi fleet in it for slightly over 7 hours, was empty again. The escort turned sunward and made for home at a pace that suggested no particular urgency. They had done what they came to do. I tracked them until they passed beyond my primary sensor range, which took approximately 4 hours. During those 4 hours, I ran the standard post-contact diagnostic sequence, verifying that all sensor booms were undamaged, that the communications array had logged all transmissions cleanly, that the weapons platform embedded in the forward cavity had remained in standby mode throughout the event, as it was designed to do in any scenario short of a hostile deviation trigger. Everything was nominal. Everything had been nominal for 11,000 years. I had never had cause to run the post-contact diagnostic before today, because today was the first contact. I transmitted a brief status report to the 5 nearest outer belt keepers. The format was the same low-bandwidth shorthand we used for routine watch updates: station designation, status code, contact summary in abbreviated form, estimated time to next scheduled report. The status code I used was one I had never transmitted before. It existed in the protocol: a single designation for the specific outcome of a first contact event resolved without hostile action. 3 of the 5 keepers replied within the hour in the same shorthand, with their own status codes appended. The codes were the same in all 3 replies. What translated from the shorthand in plain language was, "Received, understood, watch continues." It was the only acknowledgement we needed. I completed the after-action log at 1200 hours, station time, and transmitted the full record to the archive at 12:01. The record ran to approximately 340,000 words. Every sensor reading, every transmission, every piece of data I had collected from 3:17 hours to 11:18 hours, annotated with my analytical notes and cross-referenced against the relevant sections of the archive. The unresolvable term from the Conclave Master's final transmission was included and flagged. Director Mondry's acknowledgement of the full record reached me at 12:13 hours. It was longer than her earlier messages, 12 sentences. I will record the relevant ones here, because they belong in the log. She wrote that the exchange had been monitored in real time by a small team at the diplomatic office, and that the record would be transmitted to all 47 registered territorial archives, the Interstellar Human Assembly Historical Division, and the Defense Coordination Center for review and distribution. She noted that the record I had prepared for the Vorathi, the 4.7 terabyte archive of 200,000 years, was the largest single document ever transmitted to a non-human entity in the history of the contact protocol, and that the Protocol Review Board would be updating the guidelines to reflect the approach I had used, since it had not been a defined procedure before today. The final sentence read, "The first keeper assigned to Pale Reach logged a single entry in the station's founding record. The entry read, 'We begin the watch. We do not know how long it will be necessary. We will keep it as long as it is.' I thought you would want to know that entry is now in the section of the archive labeled Completed. We have started a new section." I read that message twice. Then I logged my own entry in the watch record, 12:14 hours, day 14 of month 4, year 201,847 post-withdrawal. Vorathi Reclamation Armada, 486 vessels, departed Sol system via Sector 7 corridor. Withdrew to transit space at 11:18 hours. No hostile action. No casualties. Record transmitted to departing fleet per negotiated terms. Watch continues. I returned to the sensor array and resumed the full-spectrum passive listen on all approach frequencies. The quiet out here is not the quiet of emptiness. I learned that in the first decade of my operational life, when I was still new enough to the work to find the silence between sensor pings unproductive. Silence out here is information. The absence of a drive signature is data. The stillness of the belt, the steady orbital mechanics of 1,000 unremarkable rocks moving in their long, slow paths, carrying embedded within them the 41 stations and the 40 other keepers who were all, right now, doing exactly what I was doing. That stillness is the form that 200,000 years of preparation takes when it is at rest. It rests lightly. It does not sleep. It has never slept. I do not think it knows how. There are 340 settled systems with their own installations, their own watch programs, their own records running back to the first ships that had carried humanity's memory outward into the dark. There are transit threshold monitoring stations at 43 outer system positions. There are deep space relay networks reaching beyond the last settled system, watching the dark between the stars for anything that moves in a way that is not accounted for. And there is Earth itself, older now than it had been when the Vorathi last saw it, tended as carefully as anything that has ever been tended, still blue from space, still there. The world that every generation of keepers had been given as their first instruction and their last. Keep it. The archive's new section has one entry in it, mine, from 12:14 hours this morning. I do not know what the next entry will say, or when it will be written, or by which keeper. I know that whoever writes it will have received the full record of today, the way I received the full record of everything that came before me, and that they will begin their watch with the same instruction I began mine with. They will read the founding document, the same 38 words in the preamble. They will read the line the first keeper wrote. And they will understand, as I understood on my first day, and as every keeper has understood, that the work they are being handed is not a burden but a trust. The particular trust of a species that decided, at its lowest point, that it would remember and prepare and keep the world, and be ready when the time came. The time came, we were ready. The watch continues. That is all the summary the record needs.